Hello, welcome to this second video. Human beings are storytellers. We like to tell stories. We like to listen to other stories and their experiences. But sometimes we listen just with our heads, just processing the information and interpreting instead of really deeply listening to what the other person is sharing. And sometimes we fail to listen to a person actively. Have you ever walked away from a ministry visit and realized you did most of the talking? This was a struggle for me in my earlier days of clinical pastoral training. Discussions with my mentors, my supervisors, and peers helped me realize that I was doing all the talking and not listening to what people who were receiving my care wanted. I'm happy to say that I've made much progress in this area. Many times, ministers enter situations with pre-packaged responses and scriptures and deliver them to people, often neglecting the important skill of listening actively. While scripture and comforting words are important, they lose the influence on people in the absence of deep listening. When we listen actively to others, we represent a God who listens to the pain and cries of his people. The scripture is full of situations, experiences, and pain where God heard. In many times it says God was listening, God heard, God actively heard the cries of people. Active listening is a quintessential skill in pastoral caregiving and ministry. You can be a pastor who lacks other ministry skills, but if you lack good listening, your effectiveness is drastically reduced. The Apostle James reminds us that we ought to be quick to listen and slow to anger. The Dalai Lama said, "When you talk, you are only repeating what you already know. But if you listen, you may learn something new." That is very true in my experience. Most of us listen with the intent to respond. While the other person is talking, we are already busy preparing our responses. That is poor listening. Active listening is listening to understand what the other person is saying, to understand what the other person is not saying. In active listening, we pay attention not only to the words, but to the body language, because body language communicates about 60% of what we want to communicate to others. Active listening to others, it builds trust, it builds safety, which helps considerably in meaningful pastoral ministry. Active listening also involves asking questions that help the person explore more deeply within themselves. It is more than simply fact-finding. For example, instead of asking a person, "Why are you not trusting God in this crisis? Didn't God promise all these things? Don't you trust God?" It helps if you ask them, "Tell me how not trusting God is helping you in this situation." You see, the response is that you're inviting the person to open up more rather than telling them and asking them a question, which sometimes why questions tend to be very judgmental. So stay away from them. Our ability to listen to others is directly proportionate to our ability to listen to our own thoughts, attitudes, and feelings. In other words, when we fail to listen to ourselves and to look deeper into our lives, we fail to listen to others actively. As you develop good listening skills, please stay away from cliches or unhelpful statements such as, "There is a reason for everything." Or when you see someone crying, "Don't cry." Or in times of death, I've heard ministers make terrible statements like, "At least you have other family members." Or, "God needed a flower in the garden." These are terrible responses. Why? It doesn't help the person who is listening to them. If you have any doubt, ask them. What these people are experiencing is more than something that can be minimized or reduced to certain words and cliches. So be very careful in what you say in the process of active listening. A final word on active listening is when people complain about their experiences of God, many people who go through very difficult stages in life, and when they're going through pain and despair, they might question the presence of God. If you are called to minister in such situations, be prepared to bite your tongue. What I mean by this is, do not respond immediately. You may think that the person is questioning the absence of God or presence of God intellectually. On the contrary, what they're doing is they are giving words to a struggle in trying to understand what is happening, and the weight of the pain and suffering is too heavy on their shoulders. So they're not really looking for, "God, where are you? I want to see and hear the existence of God." They're more like they're expressing their agony. They want God to be with them so closely. They're so desperate for God's presence. If there's a need for such conversation about God's presence or absence in someone's life, a crisis is not the best time to have it. Have such conversations once the crisis has passed. Talk to that person or persons when they are much calmer, or maybe when they are more open to have the conversation. I find it quite fascinating that God never accuses Job for all the questions and all the statements that Job made in his crisis. He's cursing himself and cursing all the situations. He doesn't like his friends. He asks a lot of questions to God, but God never judges him or accuses him or blames him. We should neither. Active listening in ministry is not passive activity. It is a sacred act. When you're actively listening to someone, you may be thinking, "Well, I'm not saying anything." Exactly, that is the point. The more we listen deeply to others, they trust our presence. They feel safer to explain or to pour out their heart. And then we can minister more effectively, genuinely, compassionately to them. For ministers, this means learning to quiet the impulse to immediately explain, correct, or fix what we hear. Instead, we remain attentive, we become curious, and we become compassionate. Our listening to people in pain becomes a great way of honoring their dignity and allowing their experience and story to unfold at their own pace. We don't need to overwhelm them with all of our responses. Over time, you will discover that the most meaningful ministry moments often come not from what you say, but from how well you listen. When people sense that you are truly present with them in a genuine, compassionate, truthful manner, without judgment or without rushing, they will start pouring out more of their lives and concerns to you. And now that you have earned their trust, you can better care for them spiritually and emotionally. They are reminded of a God who listens to them always. We represent God before others. Next week, we will consider how your own life story and experiences can be a resource in ministry. Until then, goodbye.